I wanted to take a second and just talk about some of the basics of graphing lines. Give you some definitions, some vocabulary, just some things to look out for. So let's start off talking about probably the most important term, which is slope. Now, slope is the change vertically divided by the change horizontally. It's the rate of change there's a lot of different ways that you can talk about slope. But it's how much, as I move along, it's how much vertically my graph is changing. So a lot of times you'll see this as change in y over change in x. And oftentimes mathematicians will write this like this. Delta, that's what that triangle is. The triangle is delta, which we use to represent change. Delta y over delta x. So if you want to be cool, you could write delta y over delta x. Okay, so that's slope. Now, there's two other things for now that we'll talk about. The y-intercept is one of them. And the y-intercept is the point where the line crosses the y-axis, right? The y-axis, that's our 0 point. And so the y-intercept is where we cross that y-axis. It's the point where x is equal to 0. It's the point where x equals 0 on my graph. And so oftentimes it, as a point, it's 0 comma whatever the y-intercept is. Okay, so that's the y-intercept. Now, if there's a y-intercept, you should think that there is an x-intercept. And it's pretty much the same as the y-intercept. It's the point where the line, or where you, oops, I don't know what I'm trying to write there, linguini or something, where the line, or where the graph crosses the x-axis. It's where y equals 0, and so that point is generally seen as the x-intercept, comma 0. So those are some definitions that will be helpful for you going forward. Now let's look at these graphs below. I have some nice graphs here. And let's talk about types of slope and the x-intercept and the y-intercept. I'm not going to find the exact slope for now, but I just want to talk about types of slope, the x-intercept and the y-intercept as well. Okay, so if I look at this graph right here, I want you to think, is this graph, as my x increases, does my y increase or decrease? As the x increases, as my x increases, what does y do? Well, here y is increasing while x is increasing. It's a positive slope. It's going up. So here my slope is positive. Okay, now let's look at what's the x-intercept and y-intercept. The x-intercept is where the graph crosses the x-axis, where y equals 0. So we can see that the x-intercept is 1, 2 is at -2. So that's -2, comma 0. That's my x-intercept. And then my y-intercept is up here. The y-intercept is where x is 0, and that where x is 0, y is 1. So here I have a positive slope, x-intercept of -2, y-intercept of 1. Let's look at this next graph. Okay, now as x is increasing here, y is decreasing. So we would say that this is a negative slope. Now, this is maybe a little off, but it's pretty close. So my x-intercept is about right there. We're fudging it maybe a little bit. My x-intercept, again, that's kind of crazy, is at -2. Again, it's where y equals 0. My y-intercept is at -1, where, and again, that's where x equals 0. Okay, this is kind of a strange line. It's just a horizontal line. So here, again, think, as x increases, what is y doing? Well, y is staying the same. It's not changing. So when y doesn't change, I call that a zero slope. A zero slope, because it's just a horizontal line. It's not changing at all. So it really has a zero slope. It's like walking on pavement, right? You're not walking uphill, you're not walking downhill, you're just going straight. So then here, the x-intercept, well, it doesn't exist. We don't have an x-intercept, right? There is no point where our line crosses the x-axis, sorry. But the y-intercept, we do have a y-intercept. The y-intercept is at this point right here, +2. Oops, I really want that to be in blue. We'll try to keep it consistent. So the y-intercept, sorry about that, the y-intercept is at +2. Okay, last one, another strange one. This is a vertical line. And this actually isn't even a function, right? It would fail the vertical line test. My x, the only value my x will ever be here is -2, but y has a bunch of different values, so it's not a function. So my slope then is undefined. Because even though y changes, we don't know if it's going up or if it's going down, right? I can't tell if it's positive or it's negative. And x never changes. So we actually don't know what the slope of that line is. Some people think it's infinity. Some people would like to call it 0, even though we have a 0 slope right here. But this slope is undefined. Okay, so then the x-intercept, well, I actually do have an x-intercept. It's right here. My x-intercept is -2 again, like the number -2. But this time, I don't have a y-intercept. I do not have a y-intercept. And this right here just means null. It's empty. It doesn't exist. That's what that symbol represents. Okay, so that's a lot about slope, but hopefully it gives you a better idea of how to look at lines and tell whether they have positive or negative slope, and some definitions for slope and lines.